All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er update video. A lot going on in 49er land today. Now, Kyle Shanahan went on the Autonomy podcast, and there was some really interesting stuff on there. And, of course, we're going to get into all this. We're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, 2 locations, Emeryville and Corte Madera. Check them out in both spots, open from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. Go say hi to Damon and Mary. Tell them that Krug sent you. Get some Pig and a Pickle. And this video brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Check the link in the description. Use the promo code KRUG, K-R-U-E-G, and they'll match you up to your first $100. But let's get into some of the Niner headlines. One, Kyle went on with TK on the podcast. There were several really interesting things that came out of it. One, he told Brock Purdy after his first season, you're our guy. You're the number one quarterback for us unless Tom Brady comes here for one season. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, he didn't say, hey, you're the number one quarterback here unless Trey Lance, comes of age. It's like, unless we get Tom Brady and he plays here. That came out in this podcast. Tim asked him if he thinks the 49ers will become more of a passing team under Brock Purdy. And Shanahan's like, we already have. And the numbers kind of show it. He says he'll always try to be very balanced, run, pass, balanced, because he believes in that as an offensive philosophy. But he did say that the Niners have become more of a passing-oriented team since Purdy became quarterback. One of the things I thought was kind of interesting is that Tim asked him about, does Brock have license at the line of scrimmage to audible and to change protections and to change plays? And Shanahan's like, yeah. It's like, he doesn't do it often. Quarterbacks in my system basically don't do it often. They defer to me. But he absolutely has the right to change the protection or change the play at the line of scrimmage. That question came up. The other thing that came up is, this idea of, trading, basically the tough decisions that have to be made when you have a salary cap sport. And the Niners chose to keep Eric Armstead and Jimmy Ward over DeForest Buckner because Buckner they could get a first-round pick for. So at the end of the day, Kyle's explaining it to Kawakami, and we all know, everybody loved Buckner, but it's not as simple as that. And I think people who follow the Niners closely, are keenly aware that it wasn't just Buckner for Kinlaw. It was Buckner versus, do you re-sign him, versus Eric Armstead and Jimmy Ward, and having the 13th pick because you could get that in return for Buckner in a trade. And does that trio of Armstead, Ward, and eventually it became Javon Kinlaw equal DeForest Buckner? And the answer is, of course, that wasn't the case. But they felt like it was worth the money, or worth rolling the dice on that. Another thing that came out in this podcast I thought was interesting was what I had said was that I really felt like Shanahan would offer Bill Belichick that defensive coordinator job this offseason when Belichick was out there looking for a head coaching job. And I was pretty convinced of it, and I kept talking about it on streams. I also really felt like Bill Belichick might actually take the job as the defensive coordinator, because I really felt like Bill Belichick is all about ball. And in this podcast, sure enough, Shanahan said, that he threw it out to him to be the Niners defensive coordinator, because in Kyle's mind, he knew that Bill, at the end of the day, is all about ball, and that, he may want to just be a defensive coordinator and not worry about press conferences and all these other things that you have to do as a head coach. So he did offer him the Niners defensive coordinator job, but he said that he wants to help his son get that program at Washington going, and he politely turned. So Shanahan said he politely turned me down, and then Shanahan said he's the best. So I had half that right. I knew Shanahan was going to offer him that defensive coordinator job. It made too much sense. And I still think, to be honest, that if Bill Belichick had become the Niners defensive coordinator, that he would have made more money than he's going to make doing whatever else he does. He was going to have more of a hands-on modern NFL. when you get more than a year or two away from the game, you start to lose all the latest things that are happening within the game. And I just think for Belichick, being the Niner defensive coordinator would have been a better route to get back in the NFL as a successful coach, because Shanahan and Purdy in this offense are going to put up 30 points a game. And if you're really a good defensive coach, and he is, I mean, Bill Belichick's defense last year was more highly rated than the Niners. And the Niners had Warner and Greenlaw and Bosa and Hargrave and all these guys. And yet New England's defense was better under Belichick than the Niners' defense was last year under Wilkes. So Bill Belichick can get it done with a whole lot less talent. And I just think that he would have pushed the Niners over the top. They would have had an overwhelming defense. They probably would have won a Super Bowl or two, and he would probably get one more big chance at a great NFL job. Instead, he's going to work for whoever, Bleacher Report or whoever he's going to work for, and do some TV work. And maybe that's enough for him, but to me, I think he should have been the Niner DC. Another interesting part of this thing with Kawakami, Shanahan said, hey, we went O-line. He's like, basically they want O-linemen, but he kind of admitted that they feel like they can do it with just anybody that they plug in here or there, from a college free agent to a day 3 draft choice to, they want a good line and they value a good lineman, and they drafted Trent Williams in DC, and he wants good offensive linemen, but he understands that not every single position on the team can you have, blue chip players and high round draft picks, and they have clearly opted to draft and invest in defensive linemen and just kind of make do as they go with offensive linemen, and it doesn't sound like it's going to change. So get used to more kind of, bottom surfing for offensive linemen, whether it be the draft, free agency, college free agents after the draft. The Niners don't see the value in spending big money on the O-line. It's an organizational philosophy. You can say it's stupid until they win a Super Bowl, and then you're going to have to say, well, I guess it was smart. They've also been enormously successful, even though they haven't gotten that Super Bowl, with their philosophy. So that was interesting to hear him kind of state that was their philosophy. Also, I thought one of the most interesting parts of the Kawakami podcast, Kyle said he thinks the Niners should have already won 3 Super Bowls in San Francisco. Now, we know he's talking about Super Bowl 54 in Miami. We know he's talking about Super Bowl 58 this last year in Vegas. The question is, what's the 3rd Super Bowl that he thinks he could have won? Does he think that Jimmy G and the team that lost to the Rams could have beaten Joe Burrow and the Bengals? Or does he believe that Brock Purdy and the team that he had last year was going to go and beat Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs? I would like to ask Kyle at some point as a follow-up, hey, you said you thought you could have won 3 Super Bowls by now. We know the 2. What's the 3rd? My guess is that it's Purdy over the Chiefs and not Jimmy G over Joe Burrow. But I'm eager to find that out. I will have to ask Kyle that question. A couple news and notes from today, of course, down at Niner Camp. Drake Jackson on the PUP list, Talanoa Afonga on the PUP list, Dre Greenlaw on the PUP list, Ricky Pearsall on the NFI list. Pearsall is going to miss at least 4 practices before he returns. I don't expect to see Greenlaw on the field in any meaningful role before Thanksgiving. Drake Jackson is, I think, the biggest concern because he's had this knee injury for a while now. What's the status of that knee? I think it's really going to be vital that Drake Jackson play well for the Niners this year, and he's not off to a great start. Brandon Aiyuk reported to camp today. John and Kyle said they expected him to report to camp. They also expect him to practice tomorrow. Tomorrow's a big day. Either Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch are going to be very unhappy, or they're going to be thrilled. If he practices, they're going to be thrilled. And if he doesn't practice, that means that he's like a hold in. In other words, he's going to show up, not get fined, but not practice, and not get on the practice field until an agreement's reached. I think that's probably a pretty good game plan. I believe, is it T. Higgins or Jamar Chase that's doing that in Cincinnati? I believe it's going to show up and practice and try to get an extension done. So I think that's what Aiyuk's going to do. But tomorrow's going to be the day. Tomorrow we're going to find out. John said there's been excellent communication throughout the process. Kyle admitted that he's concerned about Aiyuk missing time. Will he be a hold in? Or will he? He's not going to hold out. He's showed up. So is he going to hold in and not practice and go to the meetings? Or is he going to practice and play on that fifth-year option? And will the Niners then reward him with a contract extension, sometime in the next 4 or 5 weeks, either before the season starts or within the first 3 or 4 weeks? I could see that. But the most interesting part of today is when I asked John Lynch, I said, John, a year ago, you guaranteed that Nick Bosa would not be traded. Would you make that guarantee this year with Brandon Aiyuk? And he smiled, but he said, you know what? Not this time around. He said, there are no absolutes there, is what he said. So even though when he was asked about, do you have a deadline or a date, a cutoff date, and he joked, yeah, yesterday. But I think if he addressed that on a serious note, I think he joked about that so he wouldn't have to address it on a serious note. On a serious note, I think the Niners' stance is perfectly clear. They like Brandon Aiyuk. They want him on the team. They're willing to do an extension. They're only going to do it at their price. They want him to otherwise play on the fifth-year option. But it sounds like they have a deadline, and that if he's going to hold out, or if they feel like there's no deal to be made here, and if the right offer comes along in a trade, they're going to pull the trigger. There's no doubt in my mind. If they get the right offer at the right time for Brandon Aiyuk and they can't reach an agreement, they're going to pull the trigger on a trade. So otherwise you say no. Well, he's not going anywhere. He's absolutely going nowhere. And John wouldn't make that statement today with Aiyuk. Kyle also said, I love BA, but that only goes so far. Basically saying, hey, it's business, and that's just the way it's done. So as I said, John Lynch said there are no dates are there as far as deadlines on this negotiation, but rest assured the 49ers have an absolute date. They have a deadline. And if this goes beyond their deadline, they're probably going to trade Brandon Aiyuk. That's my read on the situation. Ricky Pearsall is probably going to miss at least 4 days with the hammy. Shanahan indicated that Dobbs and Allen will split second-team quarterback reps. And also George Kittle, Mooney Ward, and Jake Brendel all are post-surgery, but all are full go for practice tomorrow. Shanahan indicated that for all three of those guys, they're going to mix in liberally some rest days to keep them fresh, because they are indeed coming off surgery. So there you go. There's your 49er update. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krug Show. Thanks to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this video. Thanks to all of you guys for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube.